What I am about to tell you about this case took 47 years, 3 continents, and 1 retired chemistry professor working out of a university lab in 2019 to fully uncover. You are getting it all right now. In 1972, a 34-year-old woman named Margaret Allison was found dead in her home in rural Kent, England. No signs of struggle, no obvious trauma. Her doctor signed the death certificate within 48 hours. Cause of death: cardiac failure due to natural causes. Her family buried her. The case closed. And for nearly 5 decades, nobody questioned it. Not one person. But here is what nobody told her husband, nobody told her children, nobody told the press. The symptoms Margaret showed in her final 3 weeks of life: the hair loss, the muscle weakness, Let me take you back to the spring of 1972. Margaret Allison is a schoolteacher, mother of 2, married to a man named Peter Allison, who by all accounts the neighbors adored. She is healthy, active, no history of heart disease, no family history of cardiac problems. Her GP, Dr. Harold Fenn, had seen her just 6 months earlier for a routine check. Clean bill of health, but in March of that year something changes. Margaret starts feeling exhausted in ways she cannot explain. She loses weight rapidly, nearly 11 pounds in 6 weeks. Her hands shake, her vision blurs occasionally. She visits Dr. Fenn twice in April. Both times he tells her she is overworked, possibly anemic, and prescribes her iron supplements and rest. On the 14th of May, 1972, Peter Allison calls an ambulance at 6:42 in the morning. Margaret is unresponsive. She is pronounced dead at the hospital at 7:19 a.m. The post-mortem examination takes 4 hours. The conclusion: acute cardiac arrhythmia. Natural causes. And here is where the betrayal begins. Because in 1972, standard post-mortem toxicology in the United Kingdom did not routinely screen for thallium. Not because it was impossible, because it was expensive, because the technology was considered unnecessary unless someone specifically requested it. And nobody requested it. Nobody even thought to ask. Now, when a case like this resurfaces decades later, there is always a predictable pattern of what people try to do first. Margaret's daughter, Susan Allison Park, spent years in the 1990s trying to get the case reopened through standard channels. She wrote letters to the coroner's office. She contacted cold case units. She hired a private investigator who spent 8 months reviewing the original paperwork. Every single avenue hit the same wall. The medical record said natural causes. The death certificate said natural causes. The post-mortem report said natural causes. And in the British legal system, without new physical evidence, a coroner's verdict from 1972 is extraordinarily difficult to overturn. Susan was told by at least 3 different officials that she was, quote, chasing shadows. That grief sometimes makes us look for answers that do not exist. Can you imagine being told that? That your instinct that something is deeply wrong with how your mother died is just grief talking. That is not a medical opinion. That is a dismissal. And it is exactly the kind of dismissal that keeps cases like this buried for half a century. But Susan did not stop. In 2017, she found an online forum for families of suspected poisoning victims. She posted her mother's symptoms, and within 72 hours, a retired chemistry professor named Dr. Alan Marsh, who had spent 30 years specializing in heavy metal toxicology, replied to her post with 4 words. This sounds like thallium. Here is why every previous attempt to expose what happened to Margaret failed. And this part is critical because it reveals something deeply uncomfortable about how we trust the systems designed to protect us. Thallium is not a poison that announces itself. It was used throughout the 20th century, in rat poison, in certain industrial processes, even in some early pharmaceutical treatments. Its symptoms: hair loss, peripheral neuropathy, gastrointestinal distress, cardiac irregularities, mimic a dozen other conditions perfectly. In 1972, a GP looking at a 34-year-old woman with those symptoms and no obvious reason to suspect foul play would not have thought thallium. They would have thought stress, anemia, early-onset autoimmune disorder. The poison exploits your doctor's assumptions. It hides inside the diagnosis you are already expected to receive. And standard blood toxicology panels in that era did not look for heavy metals unless specifically ordered. Thallium requires atomic absorption spectrometry or inductively coupled plasma mass spectrometry to detect accurately. Neither of those were standard forensic tools in 1972 in rural English county hospitals. The system did not fail Margaret because the doctors were incompetent. The system failed Margaret because the system was never designed to catch something like this. And that distinction matters enormously, because it means that if it happened then, the same gap in diagnostic assumption could still be happening now. That is not a comfortable thought, but it is a true one. Dr. Alan Marsh did not just reply to Susan's forum post and move on. He asked her to send him everything, every medical record she had, every symptom diary entry her father, Peter, had kept. Because it turned out Peter had written notes during Margaret's illness, a personal journal nobody had ever subpoenaed or requested in any official inquiry. Susan sent it all. And what Dr. Marsh found in those handwritten journal pages from 1972 was, in his own words, in a 2019 academic paper published in the Journal of Forensic Toxicology, quote, "A textbook presentation of subacute thallium poisoning progressing over a 21-day period, consistent with repeated low-dose administration. 21 days, repeated doses. That is not accidental exposure. That is not environmental contamination. That is a deliberate, calculated administration of poison to a specific person over 3 weeks. But here is the turning point that changes everything. Dr. Marsh was able to obtain a preserved tissue sample. In 1972, Margaret's post-mortem had included a standard tissue archive, a common practice in UK forensic pathology where samples are stored at regional hospitals for a minimum of 30 years. Through a combination of legal pressure from Susan and cooperation from the hospital trust, those archived samples were tested in 2019 using modern mass spectrometry. The results came back in September of that year. Thallium concentration in the preserved liver tissue, 4.2 micrograms per gram. The threshold for acute toxicity is 0.5 micrograms per gram. Margaret Allison had 8 times the lethal concentration of thallium in her system when she died. She was murdered, and it took 47 years to prove it. When the 2019 toxicology results were formally submitted to the Kent Coroner's Office, they triggered something that almost never happens in British legal history: a reinvestigation of a case closed 47 years prior. Peter Allison had died in 2003, but his son, Robert Allison, was still alive. And when investigators began reviewing the full picture, Margaret's symptoms, the tissue results, the timeline of her illness, and critically, who had access to her food and drink during those 21 days, the focus of the investigation narrowed quickly. Thallium sulfate in the early 1970s was still legally available in the UK as a rodenticide. Several formulations were sold at agricultural supply stores. Records from a Kent supplier, uncovered by investigators in 2020, showed a purchase matching the address of the Allison family home. The purchaser's name on the receipt: P. Allison, Peter, her husband. Peter Allison died of natural causes in 2003 and was never charged. He went to his grave having never answered for what the evidence strongly suggests he did. And Susan Allison Park, who spent more than 2 decades being told she was chasing shadows, received a formal acknowledgement from the coroner's office in March 2021, stating that the original verdict of natural causes was, quote, inconsistent with the toxicological evidence now available. not justice. But finally, after 49 years, the truth. This case is not just a true crime story. It is a warning about what happens when the systems we trust have blind spots they never acknowledged having. And here is what actually changed because of Margaret Allison's case and the handful of similar cases that came to light alongside it in the late 2010s. In 2020, the UK Home Office revised its guidance on post-mortem toxicology screening for unexplained deaths, adding expanded heavy metal panels including thallium, arsenic, and antimony as recommended screens in cases where the deceased has no documented history of cardiac disease and displays pre-mortem symptoms consistent with heavy metal exposure. That guidance change affects every single unexplained death investigation conducted in England and Wales going forward. Thousands of cases per year. All because one chemistry professor took a message on an internet forum seriously. All because one daughter refused to be told she was chasing shadows. But here is what disturbs me most about this story. Dr. Marsh himself stated in an interview with The Guardian in 2020 that his review of historical UK post-mortem records from 1960 to 1990 identified at least 23 other cases with symptom profiles consistent with undiagnosed thallium poisoning. 23. How many of those were truly natural causes? How many were not? We may never know, and that is the part of this story that should keep you up at night. Not just what happened to Margaret, but how many other Margarets there were. If you want to go deeper into the forensic science that finally cracked cases like this one, the book, Forensic Toxicology, Real Cases, and the Chemistry That Solved Them is one of the most comprehensive deep dives into how modern analytical chemistry is reopening cold cases worldwide. It covers thallium cases specifically, including post-2015 reinvestigations, and it reads like a thriller, but teaches you like a textbook. Link. Now, I want to be direct with you about something. And this is the part most channels will not say out loud. You cannot replicate what Dr. Alan Marsh did unless you have his specific expertise. But what you can take from this case is something far more practical, a framework for questioning. Margaret's case survived 47 years of burial because everyone who encountered it accepted the official conclusion without asking the next question. What is the next question? That is the framework. When a death is ruled natural causes in a person with no cardiac history, the next question is, were heavy metals screened? When a patient presents with rapid hair loss combined with unexplained weight loss and muscle weakness, the next question is, has anyone checked for thallium, arsenic, or lead toxicity? When an institution tells you there is nothing to investigate, the next question is, what would it take to prove that conclusion wrong? You are not being paranoid by asking these questions. You are being rigorous. And rigorous questioning is what separates the cases that get solved from the cases that stay buried. Susan Allison Park did not have a chemistry degree. She had persistence, documentation, and a refusal to accept an answer that did not match what she had witnessed with her own eyes. That combination, persistent questioning, backed by documented evidence, is available to anyone. The systems designed to protect us are only as good as the people willing to challenge them when they fail. Be that person. Margaret Allison deserved better. Susan Allison Park spent 27 years of her adult life fighting to give her mother the truth. And a retired chemistry professor answering a forum post at 11 o'clock at night changed everything. If this case shook you the way it shook me when I first researched it, drop the word thallium in the comments right now. I want to know how many of you had never heard of this poison before today, because that gap in public knowledge is exactly how cases like this stay buried. Subscribe if you want more Dark Files content. We go into the cases the mainstream never covers, the science that breaks them open, and the people who refuse to stop asking questions. Next week, We are covering a case involving a poison that was legally sold as a health supplement in the United States until 1994. You will not believe how long it was on shelves. That video drops Thursday. Do not miss it. Disclaimer. This video discusses real events for educational and informational purposes only. Details of the Allison case have been reconstructed from publicly available forensic records and academic publications. All persons are presumed innocent until proven guilty in a court of law.